Hi everyone, my name is Miranda and I'm a graduate student at the University of Washington. Today I'm going to be presenting joint work between UW and Google about expert advice for staying safer from hate and harassment. A recent paper published at IEEE S&P found that 48% of people globally have experienced online hate and harassment. These experiences include a wide variety of attacks across different online spaces, such as non-consensual intimate image sharing, receiving hateful messages, or having an account get hacked. As researchers in the security and privacy community, we wanted to be able to point to a few impactful suggestions that can help users stay safer online, particularly for people who are looking for resources and want to know what to do. How can they stay safer from online hate and harassment? Which threats should they be concerned about, and which advice should they follow? To answer those questions, we summarized the security advice available online today and then asked hate and harassment experts to evaluate this advice. We focused on proactive advice because our goal was to study ways to prevent or mitigate hate and harassment before it occurs. To summarize the existing body of knowledge on advice, we first looked to the wealth of resources published online by advocates. Some examples include PEN America's Online Harassment Field Manual or Tactical Text Data Detox Kit. Some identified target populations, like Global Cyber Alliance's Toolkit for Journalists, or Violet Blue's Guide to Privacy for Smart Girls. Searching the internet, our team found a total of 49 online support guides. Next, we filtered down to 15 guides with 219 pieces of advice that were proactive, actionable, and specific to online hate and harassment. And finally, we sorted the advice through affinity diagramming, where we grouped advice by the threat it addressed and combined similar advice. This left us with 45 unique pieces of advice for our interviews with experts. Towards recruiting experts, we contacted 15 organizations or individuals at the front lines of battling online hate and harassment, resulting in 24 interviews with subject matter experts. Our participants included academics, nonprofit employees, and industry professionals, including people who had written the advice we collected in the prior step. They were mainly based in the US, although also in the UK, Turkey, and Australia, and their expertise covered many contexts in which hate and harassment occur, like social media, gaming, journalism, intimate partner abuse, and more. Our interviews lasted 90 minutes and were conducted remotely. We started by asking experts to rank the 7 threats from Thomas et al.'s taxonomy of hate and harassment, which roughly groups attacks based on how they happen. We then moved to a card sorting activity where experts ranked the 45 unique pieces of advice we had summarized before. Apart from threats and advice, we also asked experts for their top recommendations in this space and closed with an open discussion about anything else they wanted to mention. For this presentation, I'll just share some results from the first 2 sections, threat ranking and advice ranking. So on to results. Which online hate and harassment threats do experts believe users should prioritize? For this question, experts created their own criteria informed by their own experiences to rank the 7 threats from the existing taxonomy. We found that in experts' eyes, toxic content, content leakage, and surveillance were the top priorities. Over half of experts ranked either toxic content or content leakage as the number 1 priority. In the middle were lockout and control and impersonation, which were ranked the top threat a couple of times. And finally, no experts ranked false reporting or overloading as users' top priority. Digging deeper into experts' threat rankings, experts tended to give one of 3 reasons. First, many experts use severity to rank threats, saying, for example, people who are targeted by the most severe forms of online hate and harassment are in marginalized communities, and they need additional protections. Second, many experts use prevalence to rank threats. One expert described wanting to educate people about attacks they are most likely to encounter. And finally, a few experts emphasize user agency to prioritize threats. These experts wanted to help users focus on threats where users actually had the ability to act and where well-timed advice could make a big impact. So to recap the findings from our threat ranking section, experts judged toxic content, content leakage, and surveillance to be the top threats, and considered severity, prevalence, and agency in order to rank threats. Now let's move on to what our experts thought of advice. Experts tended to consider 3 things when evaluating advice: whether or not the advice was effective, whether it was easy to do, and the impact following that advice would have on users' online participation. Looking at the advice to combat toxic content, for example, we summarize 6 pieces of advice that experts broadly rated as a high priority for users, shown in red, or medium priority, shown in orange. Experts generally agreed that muting, blocking, and using platform tools were beneficial. These were seen as effective, easy to do, and with minimal effect on online participation. However, experts tended to disagree on advice that suggested users change their own behaviors, like being selective about where they participate, when they reveal a marginalized identity, or even leaving a platform entirely. Over a quarter would not recommend the last 2 at all. Now let's look at what experts said about advice to be selective about where you participate online. One expert commented that users should be selective about where they participate because only they know where they feel the most comfortable. If they don't feel comfortable or don't find it useful, it makes sense to be selective. Contrast this to an expert who believed that being selective about where to participate wasn't a good solution to hate and harassment. They said, "Just imagining the life of a perfectly secure user is really depressing. Is that really a life at all?" These quotes show the tensions between the criteria experts use to evaluate advice. One expert prioritizes efficacy, while another prioritizes effect on online participation. The tensions between taking effective action at the cost of self-censorship is a theme I'll return to later. Moving on to advice categorized for another threat, false reporting, we see that highly rated advice was not available at all. We only found one piece of advice to combat false reporting, and most experts did not think reaching out to law enforcement if you suspect being swatted was a high priority, saying it would not apply to most people. So to recap our findings from our advice ranking section, experts considered efficacy, ease, and effect on participation in order to evaluate advice, although advice was not uniformly available for all threats. So I'd like to leave you with 3 concluding thoughts. First, across all threats, we looked for advice that over 90% of experts rated as a high or medium priority. This helped us identify 13 generally applicable pieces of advice for people who want to proactively protect themselves from online hate and harassment. To combat toxic content, use muting, blocking, or platform filtering tools. To combat content leakage, follow online data minimization techniques. And to combat surveillance, use secure messaging apps and cover webcams. Finally, to combat lockout and control, follow common account security measures. This list of advice represents expert consensus about some of the best steps users can take to protect themselves. However, it's also far from a complete solution. My second concluding point is about the core tensions in the space that we uncovered. Everyone evaluates threats differently. Some experts prioritized threats that were very severe but less prevalent, while others prioritized less severe threats that were more prevalent. Similarly, experts proposed different rankings of advice depending on its efficacy, ease of implementation, and the effect it would have on how users participated online. In particular, experts highlighted that prioritizing short-term efficacy would have damaging long-term effects to online participation, noting that many marginalized groups are already self-censoring to protect themselves from harm online. Looking only at effective advice can contribute to and entrench existing marginalization. My last point is about how we move towards better online communities in the future. Through this research, experts described various approaches that can work together towards safer experiences for all. One of those will be navigating the balance between different sets of criteria. Experts pointed out there was no one single top threat or advice for everyone. Instead, some support can be broadly applicable in general contexts, like the work done in this research, while other support can be highly tailored to specific populations. Experts also called for a bigger ecosystem to support individuals and stop online abuse. As foreshadowed by Hurley nearly a decade ago, having individual users spend time on security is not an inherent good and should not be used as a first resort. Individual advice is a stopgap solution for now, but the future will also need work at the communal level, including pro-social approaches taken by entire online communities. And with that, I'd like to express our gratitude for our expert participants and the many others who supported our work. This research would not have been possible without them. Thank you!